Good morning, good day, good evening. Whenever you are, welcome to the Dopamine Slot Machine, the podcast that discusses what you need to know about the video games that your children are playing. How are they designed to get your kids hooked? How do they make money from your children? And what can you do to make sure that your child's relationship with video games is a positive one? My name is Andrew, I'm a dad of two and a lifelong gamer. And this week we've actually got the first of hopefully many special guests. But this is absolutely going to be, at least from my very biased perspective, the most special of the special guests. This is the person I first started talking to about addictive design and my concerns with it, the person I first started talking to about smartphone-free childhood. In fact, this was the first person I spoke to about the podcast entirely. So before even the first episode was released, we were talking about what it is we wanted to achieve, what we wanted to do. And so after many months of cajoling, convincing, we finally got her on the podcast. It is indeed Anna, my wonderful fiance and mother to our two beautiful children. So, Anna, tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about your history with video games in particular and smartphone-free childhood in general.
Hey, I'm Anna. I'm a mum of two. I work in tech. Surprise there. History with video games. I think from both of us, really, you are the most video game oriented one, I would say. You have most experience with it. I mean, I obviously grew up with a PC, and PC gaming was a thing when I was small. Not so much consoles. I did grow up in Romania, so at the time, these kind of things were not as readily available. But to be honest with you, I wasn't necessarily into any sort of action-y type of video games, anything with violence. I was definitely kept to the dress-up situation.
I was going to say the sort of dress-up mini-clip games.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything I didn't want to stress about shooting anyone. I didn't want to complete any puzzles. All I wanted to do was, dress up dolls, put glitter on nails, and, makeup on like these dolls as well. And then later on, when The Sims kind of appeared around, that was my go-to. I think that kind of remained my go-to up until like very recently. Yeah, who doesn't enjoy a bit of Sims? So again, just making up characters, building the houses, not so much actually playing the game.
Sort of treating it as like just dress up but more. Dress up everything.
Yeah, exactly. It was just create your own character over and over and over. So that was my jam.
And then in the pandemic, you saw everybody else playing Animal Crossing.
And I thought that is very much up my alley of, tending to your farm, doing your jobs and chores. Pretty relaxed game with fun outfits and fun customization. So yeah, I'm not the kind of gamer. I'm not a very prolific gamer, but I've had my fair share.
But it was actually, I think, your influence that first got me interested in, firstly, smartphone-free childhood and should we be giving kids smartphones in the first place? But then the sort of intersection with that and my history and knowledge about gaming and the way things are built. Because it was you who first made me aware of smartphone-free childhood, and you've been following, what was it, Papaya Parents for years.
Yeah, so it's interesting that I think the way, to be honest, there's multiple parts to this, but the way that I kind of fell into this really was when, our eldest was young and becoming parents for the first time. Obviously, learn a lot about play, and you learn a lot about, what toddler is developing with, messy play and, hand-to-eye coordination and all that stuff, and very much like the Montessori way of play. And playing and making the most of like imaginative play and kind of building on that kind of pushed me to not kind of go anti-screen. That is definitely not what it is, but it definitely pushed me to go, I will minimize screens and focus on the important bits where you actually live in childhood and touching things, touching grass, throwing some stones around, that kind of stuff. And then I think also from personal experiences, seeing like the irritability that came with prolonged screen use, because let's be honest, we live in the UK, and we all have times where, we just need the children to watch a bit of TV. Sometimes it might be that we're ill and we just don't have another option. So
I think when I really noticed it in our eldest was during COVID, and then seeing the difference between shows like Cocomelon or Marsha and the Bear was another one. Another one which I remember us both sort of looking at each other thinking, what on earth is this? So intense compared to more relaxed shows.
Yeah, that is another thing that we kind of like looked at, is the content that I think we made a real effort to also consume the content and kind of vet it a bit. And
I have reviewed every single Cocomelon episode. I'm kidding.
But yeah, I think we definitely fell in agreement where the stuff that was incredibly fast paced and very neurotic was not producing, it wasn't having great effects. And there's no wonder about that, right? Especially in very young children that don't quite have the the emotional processing of that, and they just kind of let it out in a physical way. They don't really have the language to express how they feel. So yeah, I think that's when we made a conscious decision to kind of keep TV to, a minimum, and also to high quality content.
So we've actually played some video games together as well.
Yes.
And coming from very different backgrounds and different approaches to gaming, how has, from your background, very casual, very relaxed, slow paced, then meeting with me, I was always very interested in sort of achievement based gaming. Let's go beat this game. Let's go complete this story. Let's finish this quest. How have you found that as an experience?
We definitely have very different experiences when it comes to the effect of gaming. Okay, so for context, I also enjoy and I partake in this willingly, We play some co-op games, mostly puzzle games. We're not doing anything way too intense, but as part of the game story sometimes where we're playing this co-op game, there'll be some more intense moments where you need to perform and you are time bound. You need to get that jump at that specific time. Otherwise, you fall in. And I think, we fell into the co-op games because it was COVID. Obviously, after the kids went to bed, everyone was stuck between the same four walls, really.
I would perhaps less described it as we fell into co-op games and more I pushed you off into them.
Okay, but I was receptive. I think it's something that we kind of got into as a bit of a routine because there was not much to do, and that was, one outlet that we had after the kids have gone to bed. But definitely the experience, like you describe gaming, there's something that is very relaxing. You get that sense of achievement once you complete the mission. However, I feel absolutely drained. And by no means we're not playing anything horror. We're not playing anything that is spooky or like thrillery in theme. But to me, jumping from one platform to the other proves to be exhilarating enough to make me feel as if I've just ran an emotional marathon.
There's a game we've been playing recently called Split Fiction, and I absolutely love it. You tell me you love it. I think so.
It's a great game and it's a great storyline. However, the effect, even though I'm enjoying it and I willingly want to play it, I am left very emotionally drained after.
The game show quest. That there's one specific side quest in it where you've really got to you're passing this ball that will explode if you don't pass it quickly enough, back and forth, whilst trying to get to the end of this platforming section. And I don't think I've ever seen you so stressed.
Yeah, and this is what, for me, it has a big, impact on me. Like, my heart rate is going, I am left exhausted after it. So I can't help but think of, children that are playing games, just games that are achievement based in general, and, their frustration might come out, into the outer world. So, you always hear about, children that lose a game and then they throw the controller out of frustration. Children that lose a game and then, eventually the time is up on the PlayStation and they have to come off and, they're in a foul mood all day. I think that's another thing that just kind of makes me weary. is, we think of this online world that is technically easy to leave behind, but actually how much of that online world do you carry out with you into the outer world?
There's an emotional stickiness to it.
Yes, absolutely. It would really suck to have like our eldest come off a game and feel the whole day has been ruined because something didn't go quite right.
So we do agree on a lot of things, video games. I mean, no online games, no microtransactions, trying to be careful with the sort of content. But what are some things that we disagree on regarding video games, and specifically as it pertains to children? I can think of one big one.
Go on.
So there was a game that recently got re-released for the PlayStation, and it was a game that I played a lot as a kid, and I've got very fond memories of. It's a game called Time Splitters, and it's a cartoony shooting game, first-person shooting game. And I suggested playing this with our eldest, and you're like, absolutely not. It's a first-person shooting game. Nope, not having it. And I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about.
So, like, as I've grown older, I've realized a lot more about how I feel a lot more weary about the desensitization. The desensitization. Very good, thank you. Of certain things. So I remember just to give an example, as a child, well, not as a child, as like an early teen, when you would sneak off and watch a horror that is obviously, way above your age rating, and you would not even, an eyelid at the very gruesome scenes portrayed. However, if your mum and dad were watching the same thing, they would be absolutely horrified.
I can't say I empathise there. Dad, if you're listening, it was very questionable to give 3-year-old me Doom and Duke Nukem.
So it's definitely something as a teen and child, who cares? This is obviously fake. I don't feel very affected. But that also kind of plays into the, if you're exposed enough times, you become desensitized. And to me, look at guns, and even for me, like physical toy guns, I know this is maybe a bit silly, but I'm just like, we're looking at this and we're using it as a play instrument, and it's actually just a gun. Yeah, we know what this is meant for. I'm just not in agreement with the shooting element of it and the weapon usage.
I suppose I'm naturally quite sensitive, and for my own awareness, to addictive design. But then, perhaps due to that very same desensitization you're talking about, completely overlook the sort of content side of things. And I don't mean in the sense of, sex, nudity, and super adult themes. Yeah, that's fine for kids. I don't mean it in that sort of sense. But as you're saying, like with use of weaponry, it would never even cross my mind that could be a concern. But actually, probably to a lot of listeners, that's exactly the sort of thing that they do worry about.
Yeah, I mean, like, we have enough horrible stories in the news about, especially in the US, children finding, and I know there's a lot of like precursors to this, but I think that also doesn't help the gun violence rhetoric.
Okay. So what's something that, since we've started looking at this a lot more consciously, what's something that's shocked you the most once we started looking to the way video games are designed and children's relationship with video games?
I think so. I was never really interested in gambling. I think the furthest I've gone into gambling have been like, a lottery ticket and a scratch card that have, somehow ended up in front of me as a, like a Christmas thing that someone's did. Like, I've never consciously gone and purchased a scratch card. But so my gambling exposure and, knowledge of gambling concepts was fairly limited when, you've kind of exposed that to me. And you kind of said, hey, like, look at the similarities between these two things. And then obviously seeing you do deep dives on Roblox and having a look what's out there, it's crazy. Gambling is a real issue for consenting adults who are able to emotionally regulate. It's so easy to fall down that spiral, and before you know it, you could lose your house. Like children that have absolutely no emotional regulation stand no chance in front of these.
I remember after I did that first sort of investigative session with Brandon on Roblox, and I'd come across the Sad Room, a set of literal casino games where you get a few points for free, but then if you want to keep playing, it then starts prompting you over and over to pay for these points with Robux. I was really shaken then, just showing you some of the screenshots from it that I had taken.
Yeah, I think this is another concept that is crazy. Is I think this is something that we definitely didn't have when we were growing up, and I think we were a pretty online generation. Like we were a bit the cowboys of the online world, first experiencing a lot of weird stuff on the internet. But I think we didn't have the issue of worrying about spending money at that
Yeah.
time on the internet. Whereas now everything is pay to unlock, hit here to have more fun. I think children nowadays are very desensitized to the fact that they have to spend real money in form of coins or tokens or bucks or whatever it may be transacting as on the internet. And again, just losing real sense of the value of that hard-earned money that their parents are working for. It's crazy.
What's been the hardest thing from your perspective about being a parent who wants their children to have smartphone-free childhoods?
It's definitely been it is the peer pressure, isn't it? And not in the terms of, not being able to sustain our point or talk to our children about it and why we're doing this and why we're committed. There's definitely a lot of support out there. I feel like the smartphone free childhood community is very supportive of one another, and it's flourishing. More and more people are realizing this is an issue and they are committing to this. I think the biggest thing is, and I think this is what other parents are also concerned about, is your children not feeling left out of something that is basically ruling their generation. And as they grow up and push boundaries, like you I don't think you ever really want them to feel like they're really missing out, but why on this occasion they are missing out. So it's really hard to sometimes convey that message over and over, and sometimes reach that agreement when many people in the class are accessing this. And what we find as well is a lot of our daughter, even though she doesn't have access to this, she her classmates tell her about the kind of content that they access, and it's just terrifying. It's kind of like analog.
So when she comes home and is like, "Oh, what's a GAT?" And for our listeners who may not be aware, GAT is a very sexualized lingo for a bum, specifically an attractive bum.
Yeah, it's like the BBL
Yeah.
of the Gen Z.
And so for our 7-year-old daughter to be like, what's a GAT? Why are all the girls in the class talking about having a GAT? And being like, one, you shouldn't be exposed to that sort of language anyway. And two, you shouldn't feel so left out because you don't know what it is, just because other girls in your class have unrestricted smart device use.
Absolutely. So, yeah, we find that the analog transfer happens quite a bit as well. So, even though from a household perspective, we have things locked down and we don't have access to a lot of these things, it doesn't take much to go consume it at school.
Yeah. It's frankly does start to become our business what choices other parents are making with their children when it starts to impact our children. It's all very well saying, oh, if you don't want kids to have the Roblox CEO, when he was saying, oh, if you don't like Roblox, just don't let your kids use it. And like, yeah, that's fine and all, but there's wider implications for what they're doing here. From the societal impacts of introducing gambling at such a young age to the productivity consequences that you're going to have from having people who are just unable to focus, to the fact that our kids are indirectly exposed to all of this.
Yeah, I think as well with, obviously I mentioned earlier, we were kind of cowboys of the internet in our teens, and
Just very unregulated.
just very unregulated. I think certain households, very similar to now, suffered from I'm not quite sure what's available online. It's the lack of knowledge and understanding of what is happening behind the screen sometimes. And obviously more parents that would be more aware and would be more technologically savvy would have, parenting controls in place, but, mine weren't. They had no idea. So I was very much free to roam the internet to the full extent of it. And, even when I was 12, 13, that was a very horrifying place to be. And I think it's got even more horrifying. So instead of being in front of the desktop now, you have that following you in your pocket. So yeah.
It used to be the case that if you saw something online that upset you, you could step away. It's with you everywhere.
But even then, I mean, I think part of my weariness of letting any of our kids online is part of the things I've been exposed to online at an early age. And again, mostly just not, you're not seeking it actively, you just kind of stumble upon it.
So just for listeners' sake, to put a number on that age, we were both 12 when the iPhone was released.
Yes.
So we both saw that sort of before and after of that cataclysmic event that was the first few years of smartphones. So I don't know if you, like me, had that MSN on the computer that you'd get back home to message your mates on, but we saw it go from the group chat going from a place you went to something that was with you always. And we felt that impact very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think as soon as, not even like this, okay, smartphones started kind of rolling out for my friend group, sort of like 16 to 17, age group kind of thing. But prior to that, you had that wave of everyone had a BlackBerry phone. And that was, I think, the gateway to that, because you had BBM, BlackBerry Messenger. So you could message for free with a lot of the other BlackBerry users. So I think that was the starting point of having my friend readily available to message all day, every day. And I remember, everyone having a BlackBerry at that point.
Okay. I've got one last question for you today, because we're rapidly running out of time. And that's, if you had a magic wand and there was one thing you could change about children's video games, or the video games that children play in general, or anything related to those sorts of topics, what would it be?
Can I ask for more wishes?
Ask for more wishes.
I think if I was to choose, my final thing would be that children's games are a lot more focused on like a relaxing content and more like leading into like a creative side, rather than a competitive or gambly sort of thing. So I feel like it would be a better world if we could all just make up some Sims, paint some nails, and play Minecraft in creative mode.
We nearly had a whole episode without talking about how great Minecraft is in comparison to other games. We nearly did it.
Sorry to ruin the streak.
But yes, thank you so much for coming along. Thank you for finally joining for an episode. It's been awesome having you on.
Thank you for having me. Not quite the broadcaster that you are, but hopefully you enjoyed that.
I think you're a natural. But yeah, so don't forget that if you've got any questions for us, or if you or your children have been impacted by the issues we've discussed today, that you can get in touch with us on our website, thedopamineslotmachine.co.uk, or find us on the Dopamine Slot Machine Discussion Corner Facebook group. All links can be found in our artist profile, and we would love to have you join us. That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining. Please do come with us again in next week's episode, where, again, I've got a very exciting guest lined up, and I'm very excited to speak with them on it. And I'm sure that you'll have as much fun as I will then. I don't want to tell you yet. I want it to be a surprise, but they are somebody that, again, I've been admiring the work they've been doing for a while. This has been the Dopamine Slot Machine. Thank you, and see you soon.